Lucy Lowry. I'm the library director for the North Mankato Taylor Library, which is right across the parking lot, and you're welcome to stop over there when we're finished here tonight. Some of you already know Filip, as I understand, so you don't really need an introduction, but this is Filip Mazurczak, and he has been in Poland studying, living, and actually was in touch with the Szpilman family. Some of you may have read the book The Pianist as part of our 2015 community read in North Mankato. It was a really popular community read, the best of 4 that we've had so far. And Filip actually called me from Poland, I think, didn't you?
I don't remember if I was there, if I was here.
He called me and said that, you saw that we were doing this, and it would have been wonderful to have him at that time, but of course he was in Poland at the time, so he couldn't do it then. So now we're having him come back and do this now. So he has been in touch with Władysław Szpilman's widow and family, and what we didn't understand so much when we were reading the book, The Pianist, was what a remarkable career he had as a composer and musician following the book, The Pianist, once he was liberated and so forth. And so we have Filip here, who's going to tell us all about it.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Lucy. It's an honor and a privilege to speak to you today, and congratulations on having this Community Reads program, because we live in an age when not necessarily people are reading as much as they should, and this is, in my opinion, a great way to boost readership, to encourage people to read. So keep up the good work. So in my presentation, first of all, I'd like to give a brief outline and introduction to the history of Poland and the history of Poland's Jews in order to get some historical context to The Pianist. I'm guessing everyone here has at least seen the film or read the book, right? Right. So I think that this would be a good complement to this. In the second part, I'd like to, like Lucy said, in the United States and many other parts of the world, people know Władysław Szpilman above all from the book and film The Pianist, which is fine, but they don't. But his music isn't as well known outside Poland. So I will play 2 songs by him, pre-recorded, and I translated the lyrics so you can follow along. I will conclude with showing some photographs of myself and Szpilman's widow, and discuss some of my conversations with her. I've visited the Szpilman house 3 times, so I wanted to share a little bit about that. So for starters, well, this is what Poland looked like about 1,000 years ago, which is when we start to date Polish statehood. A country such as Poland first came to being in the 10th century. The first major date in Polish history was the baptism of the country's Duke, Mieszko I, in 966 AD. At this time, there really wasn't so much a concept of Europe. It was only more during the Renaissance, when Europeans began exploring different continents, that sort of concept of Europe came about. Previously, there was just the concept of Christendom, and so the baptism of Poland's first ruler was crucial to making Poland part of Christian Europe. Polish is a West Slavic language. It's written in the Latin alphabet, not in the Cyrillic alphabet like Eastern Slavic languages, for example. It's most closely related to Czech and Slovak. And so presently, about 80% of the world's Jews trace their ancestry to Poland. Why is this? Well, there's a long history of Jewish settlement to Poland. I think that one important first date would be 1364, which is when the Prince Boleslaus the Pious gave certain privileges in what was known as the Statute of Kalisz. He denounced blood libel charges, which were accusations that that Jews killed Christian children and used their blood to make matzos, which was common in medieval Europe. Yiddish language courts were established, and so Jews were given a lot of their self-rule, a lot of autonomy within Poland. There were quite severe punishments for harming Jews. This picture is made by Artur Szyk, who was a Polish Jewish illustrator, cartoonist. He later settled in the United States, where he was an illustrator of many children's books, for example, and this is his painting showing Bolesław the Pious bestowing the statue of Kalisz, and actually there was an exhibition of his work at the Jewish Museum in New York City a couple years ago. Another important ruler and who was a friend of Poland's Jews was Kazimierz, or Kazimierz in Polish, the Great. He confirmed the statute of Kalisz. He gave even more severe punishments for harming Jews, such as the death penalty for kidnapping Jewish children for forced baptism. There's also a legend that he had a Jewish lover named Esther, Esterka in Polish. We don't know if this is true. He certainly had many mistresses. And in the city of Krakow, there's the old Jewish quarter is named after him, Kazimierz. So in 1241, the Mongols spread across Europe, invading, pillaging, raping, killing, and so there was a severe shortage in the labor force in Poland. So the Polish kings encouraged Jews to settle in order to make up for the loss in population. Also, there were no ghettos in Poland. In most of the rest of Europe, Jews were confined in ghettos. They were forced to live separately from Christians. The first ghetto was in Venice. The word ghetto is of Italian origin. And so here, for example, we have a history of some of the persecutions of Jews elsewhere in Europe. For example, in 1215, the Catholic Church decreed that Jews must be segregated from Christians and wear bits of clothing that would distinguish them from Jews. Here we have a list of different countries in which Jews were expelled from. For example, in 1492, Spain. Well, what else happened in 1492? That's of importance to this country. Queen Isabel of Spain sent out Christopher Columbus to try to find a trader out to the Indies. Well, that year she also expelled all the Jews and all the Muslims, for that matter, from Spain. In many parts of Europe, Jews were accused of poisoning wells, of, like I said before, of kidnapping Jewish children and using their blood to make unleavened bread. But also during the Crusades, which Poland never took part in, there were many abuses against Jews and Arabs, Muslims. Also during the bubonic plague, many Jews were accused of spreading the plague. So for these reasons, Poland was a relatively safe country for the Jewish people in the Middle Ages at this time. And this did not only extend to the Jewish people. The first Polish Republic was arguably the most tolerant state in Europe. Here we have the name of Paweł Włodkowicz, who was the rector of the Academy of Krakow in the 15th century. He wrote letters. He wrote letters to the Pope condemning the forced conversions by the Teutonic Knights, who were a kind of German order of monks and at the same time knights. They used violence to convert the pagan people of the Baltics, of who's now Lithuania, Latvia, for example. Włodkowicz wrote letters condemning this. Erasmus of Rotterdam, the great Dutch Renaissance humanist, often wrote in his letters, Polonia mea est, Poland is mine, in Latin. While there were wars of religion across Europe, there's the St. Bartholomew's massacre in Paris, for example. There were the activities of the Inquisition in England and other Protestant countries. Lots of women were accused of being witches and were burned at the stakes. Poland was a relatively tolerant country at this time. there was no obstacle for people of various faiths settling there, such as Protestants who were persecuted, Armenians who were fleeing abuses by the Turks. Now, naturally, there were cases of intolerance, such as, for example, the Polish Brethren, who were a radical Protestant sect who rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. So they rejected the belief that God was in three persons, were expelled at one point. There were occasional outbursts of anti-Jewish violence in Poland, but overall, the country was much safer and more tolerant for people of various beliefs than the rest of Europe. This also coincided with the height of Polish achievements in many fields. In science, for example, Nicholas Copernicus, who first postulated that the Earth revolves around the sun, not vice versa, was educated and born in Poland. At a certain point, the Polish state stretched from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea and was the largest in Europe. Also, the nobility was about 8 to 10% of Poland's population, and starting in 1572, when the Jagiellonian dynasty died out, Polish kings were elected by parliaments. This was the second oldest parliament in Europe after Iceland's. Only nobles, aristocrats could vote, but still that was much more democratic, I think, than anywhere else. So there, for example, the first elected Polish king was French. He abdicated after about a year and a half, as considered to be one of the worst Polish kings, but then he came back to France, and many French people consider him to be one of the best French kings. So who were these Polish Jews? There are two categories of Jews, Ashkenazi versus Sephardic Jews. Ashkenazi Jews come from Central and Eastern Europe, so for example, Poland, Germany, Ukraine, Russia. They speak Yiddish, or spoke Yiddish rather, which is a dialect of High German. It's written in the Hebrew alphabet and has many words borrowed from Polish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, etc. There are also Sephardic Jews who come from Spain, Portugal. Their language is Ladino, which is related to Spanish. Also lived in North Africa, the Middle East. There's actually today in Israel, there's a lot of tensions between Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews. And so the Polish Jews were generally loyal to the king. They paid taxes. And like I said earlier, 80% of the world's Jews today trace their origins to Poland. In the 6th, 17th century, the Polish state began to decline internally. In 1648, Bohdan Khmelnytsky, who's kind of a controversial figure because to many Ukrainians he's a hero. He's on Ukrainian money, for example. There's a city in Ukraine named after him. To many Poles, he's kind of a villain. He led an uprising of the Cossacks, and this was devastating for Poland. Of course, this is controversial because on the one hand, Khmelnytsky and his Cossacks killed many people. On the other hand, the Polish state's response was also repressive. There were wars with Sweden, known as the Deluge, or like the Flood, which is the title of a novel by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Poland was devastated by the Swedish invasions. The country was internally weak. The parliamentary system, which as we saw was the second oldest in Europe and the world, was handicapped by the liberum veto, or free vote in Latin, in which just one member of the parliament could oppose legislation, oppose a motion, and then it wouldn't go down, it wouldn't be ratified. I think that the final success of the First Polish Republic was the siege of Vienna in 1683. The Austrian Emperor Leopold called his friend, the Polish King John Sobieski, to help him because the Turks were at the gates of Vienna ready to invade Europe from Vienna, and Sobieski and his hussars, his winged troops who had wings made of eagle's wings in order to startle the enemy, attacked the Turks and saved Europe from a Muslim invasion. But after that, Poland began to decay. On May 3rd, 1795, Poland adopted a constitution, which was the second oldest constitution in the United States after the United States. And the last Polish king, Stanisław August Poniatowski, was quite enlightened, quite ahead of his time. He was a Freemason, of course. He, for example, established the oldest Ministry of Education in Europe. He was also a lover of Catherine the Great of Russia, and he became really dependent on Catherine. Eventually, Poland was partitioned by Catherine the Great's Russia, by Maria Theresa's Austria, and by Frederick II's Prussia. So Poland, after these three partitions in 1772, 1773, and 1775, disappeared off the map and wouldn't emerge again as an independent state until the 20th century. And so when Poland was partitioned, there were frequent uprisings, frequent insurrections. Tadeusz Kościuszko, or Thaddeus Kościuszko in English. There's a statue of him next to the White House. There's a bridge named after him in New York. Well, he came to America and introduced the cavalry to America. He conceived the idea of building an academy at West Point. Well, so he helped the Americans fight for independence from the British, but he also came back to Poland and fought against the Russians. With the exception of the Battle of Wrocławice, this was not very successful. But there were still many insurrections against the oppressor's rule in Poland. Usually they ended with thousands of people being resettled forcibly in Siberia, for example. What did the partitions mean for the Jews? Well, it was worst under the Russian partition because until Catherine the Great, Jews couldn't settle in Russia. When Catherine the Great annexed or partitioned part of Poland, she created what was known as a Pale of Settlement in which Jews could settle. The Austrians were by far the most tolerant. Also, I forgot to mention that Alexander II was assassinated, and his assassination was linked to Jewish anarchists. And so after this, there was a series of pogroms in which the Russian Tsarist police killed thousands of Jews. In Austria, or the part of Poland that was under Austrian rule, the rulers were much more tolerant. Many Jews looked favorably upon, for example, Franz Joseph I. In general, the nationalities in the Austrian Empire in 1867, it became the Austro-Hungarian Empire because the Hungarians were given more rule, kind of a junior partner position. Yiddish and Polish were official languages of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as were many other languages, Serbian, Hungarian, etc. I'd say that the Prussians probably occupied a middle position. Many Jews today have German-sounding last names, and well, this was because they were given to them by Prussian officials. Sometimes the names actually mean something insulting or humorous in German because it was kind of some Prussian officials' way of belittling these Jews. And many Polish Jews fought for Polish independence. During the risings of Kościuszko, which I mentioned a moment ago, Berek Yoselewicz formed the first Jewish military division since biblical times, since the Maccabees, which is why we celebrate Hanukkah, right? So in a long time. In Krakow, many progressive rabbis supported Polish independence. Progressive rabbis spoke Polish to their congregations as opposed to Hebrew. Also in Piłsudski's legions, which we will talk about, quite a few Jews fought. Among them was the father of Richard Pipes, who's a famous retired historian of Russia. He was Ronald Reagan's advisor on the Soviet Union. In 1918, an independent Poland was formed. Józef Piłsudski, whom I'll mention again, formed legions that were allied with the Austrians, during World War I, whose aim was to defeat the Russians in order to pave the way for Polish independence. In we've all heard about President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, right? His plan for peace in Europe after the war. Well, President Wilson was a huge supporter of Polish independence, and in Warsaw there's a square named after him. One of the 13th of his 14 points was a Poland that would be independent and with access to the Baltic Sea. So this is what Poland looked like after the Treaty of Versailles, after World War I, and President Wilson definitely had a strong role in this. So Józef Piłsudski, he fought for Polish independence during World War II. He later fought the Bolsheviks. The Soviets tried to invade Poland, but were halted at the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, led by Piłsudski. This battle has been called the Miracle on the Vistula. And Piłsudski was a very tolerant leader. He, for example, not only towards Jews. For example, he supported Ukrainian independence. Many Ukrainian units fought for Poland in the Polish Bolshevik War. He was also opposed to anti-Semitism and to any form of chauvinism. So a lot of Jews recall crying in 1935 when he died. A lot of Poles cried too. The whole country was in mourning. Nonetheless, there was still a growth in anti-Semitism in the Second Polish Republic, which was restored after 1918, and it got worse after 1935. After 1935, a military government that was authoritarian took over. This paralleled movements in the rest of Europe. All of Europe, except for France and Czechoslovakia, turned authoritarian. In Italy, we had Mussolini. Hungary, Romania, Poland's neighbors turned authoritarian too. As there was also a lot of growing anti-Semitism across Europe. In 1938, Mussolini passed the racial laws, which excluded the Jews from Italy's public life. In Poland, the government itself did not enact that many measures that were themselves hostile towards Jews, except for some limitations on the citizenship of Polish Jews who had moved abroad, and on the production of kosher meat. But in general, the government did not like Jews, and there was growing anti-Semitism. In the majority of Polish universities, so-called ghetto benches were established, in which Jewish students were forced to sit separately from their Gentile colleagues. The number of Jews admitted to the universities was limited to reflect their proportion of the population. There were growing anti-Semitic riots. Interestingly, though, however, there were nationalist boycotts of Jewish businesses. The Polish government at the time had thought about making a colony, about having a colony in Madagascar off the coast of Africa so that Jews could settle there. Interestingly, however, the Polish government, even though it didn't particularly care for Jews, as I said, supported Zionist groups like the Irgun, who basically blew up Arabs and British in order to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And so, nonetheless, despite this growth of anti-Semitism, still a lot of Polish Jews made great contributions to the country's music, art, literature, science. One example would be Ludwig Hirschfeld, who was actually a convert to Christianity. He was of Jewish origin, who actually was the first person to divide human blood, into 3 different blood types, A, B, and O. A lot of Julian Tuwim, for example, was a Polish Jew who wrote a lot of poetry. Every child in America grows up reading Dr. Seuss. Well, every child in Poland grows up reading the poetry of Tuwim, because he wrote a lot of children's poetry, but also a lot of poetry for adults. Some of it, which is actually quite vulgar, which surprises people when they mostly associate him with children's poetry. And so, despite this growth of anti-Semitism and a hostile environment towards Jews in Poland, the situation still was better than in Germany. So a lot of Polish Jews fled a lot of Jews fled from Germany to Poland, especially after Kristallnacht in 1935. And this is an ethnic, in general, there are a lot of ethnic tensions in the Second Polish Republic. Ethnic Poles only made up 65% of the country's population. The largest minority were the Ukrainians, because like a lot of Western Ukraine today was part of Poland then. Jews were 10% Belarusians, because once again, much of what is today Belarus was part of Poland. Then with 6%, ethnic Germans were 3%. And so here's a picture of Władysław Szpilman. This is courtesy of Szpilman's son Andrzej, as are all the other private family photos, unless indicated otherwise. He was born into a family of assimilated Polish Jews. Samuel and Edwarda later changed her name to Estera Rapaport. He was born in Sosnowiec, which is in Upper Silesia, which was a place of contention between Poland and Germany at this time. Ultimately, there was an uprising that was successful, and there was a referendum on whether Poland should be part of, whether Upper Silesia should be part of Poland or Germany. And this region also has a lot of coal, so it was lucrative for that reason. Ultimately, it became part of Poland. So Szpilman's family didn't speak Yiddish. I don't know if his parents knew Yiddish. Maybe they did, but I asked Szpilman's widow, and she said that he knew not a word of Yiddish. In fact, they didn't celebrate Jewish holidays at all. His parents played music on the Sabbath day, which I think shows that they really didn't, their Jewish identity wasn't especially important to them. He came from a family of musicians. His father was a violinist. He was the head of the Union of Polish Musicians in Silesia. His mother was a pianist who taught him how to play the piano. He had 3 siblings, Regina, Halina, Henryk, and all of them died in the Holocaust, except for some relatives he had who had immigrated to Argentina and Brazil in the 1930s, some more distant relatives, cousins. And he didn't get in touch with them until he actually played concerts in Latin America. So he was a young prodigy. He was a talented young man. He first studied at the Frederick Chopin University of Music in Warsaw, and later at the Berlin Academy of Arts. Because of the rise of Nazism, which I mentioned, 1934, he returned to Poland. He was hired as a pianist for the Polish radio in 1935. Like I said, there was a growth of anti-Semitism in Poland at this time. So he was fired because of such sentiments, but he was actually reinstalled after 3 days because they couldn't find anyone who was as good as he was. He was a virtuoso composer and performer. He composed music to the films Wrzos and Dr. Murek. One of these 2 songs we'll be listening to later, and I think the film does a good job of showing this. He was actually playing Chopin, Poland's most famous composer, when the Polish radio was being bombed during the September campaign of 1939. And so his was the last broadcast of Polish radio before the war. So what can we say about World War II in Poland? In August 1939, the Soviet Union Nazi Germany signed a secret non-aggression pact in which they also agreed upon dividing up Eastern Europe between themselves. Germans and the Soviets divided Poland between themselves. Soviets also got Finland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and part of Romania known as Bessarabia. Nazi Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, and the Soviet Union followed suit 16 days later. England and France signed treaties with Poland guaranteeing that they would declare war on Germany, and they did that. But this is known as the phony war. And so first after Hitler had invaded Poland, and then later Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Hitler was spreading like a firestorm across Europe, invading country after country. England and France didn't really do anything, sad to say. Poland fought bravely for 5 weeks, which was about at the same time that France fought Nazi Germany. but it was unassisted by the West. Poland was also badly outnumbered. Poland had only 880 tanks, and the Germans had, well, more than 3 times as many, more than 8 times as many aircraft. Also, many Jews bravely fought for Poland at this time. So during this occupation, 6 million Polish citizens were killed. Half of them were ethnic Poles, half were Jews. The Soviets had shot 22,000 Polish reserve officers who were the intelligentsia, really educated people, and had blamed the crime on the Nazis. It wasn't until Gorbachev, so in the 1980s, that the Soviets actually admitted to their responsibility for the crime in what's known as the Katyn massacre. Half of Poland's Catholic priests were sent to concentration camps. Polish professors were shot by both Soviets and Nazis. Millions of Poles were forcibly exiled to Siberia or to Germany as slave laborers. For example, I have a friend whose grandmother was one of those exiled to Siberia and wrote a book about it, which was quite harrowing to read, how it was to survive in cold with little food. Warsaw was completely destroyed, as we'll see in a moment. However, the Polish government never surrendered, and it didn't create a puppet government, as was the case much of the rest of Europe, such as with Vichy in France, or with Kisling in Norway, or with the Ustaše Croats in Yugoslavia. In fact, there's a former Polish prime minister named Kazimierz Bartel who was invited to create a puppet government, but he refused and he was shot. As we can see, Germans who were occupying Poland were allowed 2,613 calories of food a day. As we all know, you need probably 2,000 to 2,500 calories to be healthy. If you work as a physical laborer, if you work in a coal mine, for example, it's probably more like 5,000. Whereas Poles were only allowed 669 and Jews were 184. So to give you an idea, a candy bar has more calories than what the Jews were allowed to eat in a given day during this occupation. In 1940, concentration camps were established. First, they held Polish political prisoners. Later, they were used increasingly to kill Jews. There was only one person who volunteered to go to Auschwitz, and his name was Witold Pilecki, who was a high-ranking officer in the Polish army. He volunteered to go to Auschwitz. He didn't actually sign up to go to it. He just when there were arrests of civilians in Warsaw, he decided to be in one of the areas where civilians were being arrested, so that he could go and see what happened in Auschwitz, to write a report to the world, and to start a resistance movement there. He survived, although later the Stalinists hanged him during communism. So the Nazi plans were that Jews and Roma or Gypsies were to be completely wiped off the earth, not a single one of them left. Poles, however, as Slavs, were seen as Untermenschen, as subhuman. So they were seen as basically either to be killed or to become slave laborers for the quote-unquote master race. And they were only allowed to have, I think, a 6th grade education. Still, Poland made large contributions to the Allied war cause. Poland had the 4th largest Allied army, largest anti-Nazi resistance movement in Europe. Polish mathematicians were the first to break the Enigma code. A lot of people have seen the movie Imitation Game about Alan Turing. For example, Polish mathematicians cracked Enigma first. So Polish pilots shot down the most German planes during the Battle of Britain. And Poles also took an active role in liberating Western Europe and liberating many Dutch cities, for example, in the Battle of Monte Cassino. And here's Hans Frank, who was the administrator of Nazi administrator of Poland. He was a law professor, fascinatingly, and was an extreme sadist. He was later killed for war crimes. And here's Here's a quote from him when he was told about the fact that when a couple of students in Czechoslovakia were protesting, there were flyers announcing this. He said, if I had to order a distribution of posters announcing such an event every time I order a shooting of 7 Poles, there would not be enough trees in the Polish forest to supply the necessary paper. And as a personal note, this is actually the tomb of my great-grandfather who was mortally wounded in the September campaign. So Nazi plans for the Jews, as we said, first they were sent into ghettos. In 1942, the so-called final solution was adopted at the Wannsee Conference, in which all Jews were to be liquidated. And most Warsaw Jews were killed in Treblinka, including all of Szpilman's immediate family. However, there was still a Jewish resistant movement in the ghetto, and Jewish guerrillas, partisans, fought bravely in the ghetto uprising of 1943. The Polish government in exile first informed the Allies about the Holocaust. Actually, a lot of the people in this government in exile were opponents of the political anti-Semitism that had grown so much in Poland in the 1930s. Edward Raczyński, Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs, gave an address to the United Nations telling what was happening to the country's Jews, and they financed Żegota, which was the Council to Aid Jews, which was a council of Polish and Jewish intellectuals, mostly activists, who gave money and false papers for Jews to survive. Approximately 40,000 Jews received false papers saying that they were non-Jews to help them survive. Szpilman also did receive some money from Żegota. There's also a Polish courier named Jan Karski who was first to inform. He directly spoke to President Roosevelt about what was happening to Poland's Jews, but Roosevelt was not especially interested in their fates. In the ghetto, Szpilman actually played the piano in ghetto restaurants to feed his family. He wrote many songs in the ghetto. Interestingly enough, which I think is good evidence that people can do both good and bad things, there was actually a Jewish police in the ghetto that helped ship off the Jews to trains that went to concentration camps. One of them, Jerzy Lewiński, actually pulled Szpilman away from the line in the deportations to Treblinka. This is shown in the movie. Szpilman also helped a little bit in smuggling weapons to the Jewish resistance from the so-called Aryan side. In 1943, he decided to escape the ghetto. Approximately 28,000 Jews escaped the ghetto and sought refuge on the so-called Aryan side of Warsaw. About 40% of them survived. There was a death penalty for aiding Jews, and this flyer was distributed all over Poland. So this instilled a lot of fear in the population, and it made many people scared of helping Jews, although certainly there were those who did. Basically, when Szpilman was hiding on the Aryan side, he had to count on the kindness of many people and be circumspect that just one person might denounce him. And there's a quote from Simcha Rodam, who's one of the 2 surviving leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It took 10 Poles to save 1 Jew, but 1 Pole to betray 100 Jews. So people like Szpilman had to constantly change hiding places to avoid suspicion. But just one person who was suspicious, who might report on him, and he was dead, and the people who hid him also. He survived thanks to approximately 30 people, which is a large number. He was fortunate in that he had a lot of non-Jewish Polish friends. He knew people whom he could come to and have a reasonable chance that they might shelter him. 2 of them were Andrzej and Janina Bogucki, who were witnesses at Szpilman's wedding in 1950. They're members of the Home Army, Poland's resistance, and they helped Szpilman get a hiding place. Like I said earlier, Szpilman got some aid from Żegota. He had to deal with starvation on the Aryan side because, as we saw earlier, non-Jewish Poles were allowed a little bit more food than Jews, but they were still basically starvation wages. In the book and the film, there's the character of Shalas who had collected food. He collected money to help feed Szpilman, but ultimately he just spent it on his own selfish needs, and Szpilman, as a result, almost died of starvation. Constantly needed to be quiet. And actually, in the film, there's a scene in which he's trying to cook something, and he drops a pan, and as a result, the neighbor gets suspicious and is almost ready to report on him. It was also constant boredom. It would be great to survive, but can you imagine just sitting in an apartment, not laying in bed, not doing anything? So in the book, which, as many of you have read it, you recall, he writes that he practices English in his head in order to survive the boredom, and that's something that really stuck out to me. I mean, I just can't imagine just sitting in one place and not doing anything, being completely quiet. Had to do something. So, like I said, there's about 40% survival chance that Jews who escaped and sought refuge among their Polish neighbors in Warsaw could survive. Szpilman was one of the 40% who were fortunate. And so at this time, Polish-Jewish relations were very complex, very paradoxical. They ranged a lot, I think, based on the individual, based on the region of Poland. On the one hand, in northeastern Poland, there was a series of pogroms in which the Germans inspired local Poles to kill several thousand Jews. The most famous pogrom was in Jedwabne. On the other hand, in Ukraine, which is then part of Poland, there were many cases of Poles aiding Jews as they faced two enemies, both Poles and Jews, the Germans and Ukrainian nationalists. The Żegota Council to Aid Jews was formed. On the other hand, there were people who could betray him. So there was a lot of variation in relationships between Poles and Jews. And someone like Szpilman, to survive, he basically had to count on every single person being a hero and being ready to save him, and be completely circumspect that just one person could denounce him and it was all over. The book and film also mentioned the Warsaw Uprising. So the first major urban uprising in occupied Europe was the Ghetto Uprising in 1943. These Jewish fighters, a lot of them were young boys who were sometimes teenagers, they only had a limited supply of arms. They had no chance of defeating the Germans, but they just wanted to die with dignity. They wanted to die with arms in their hands. The Polish popular opinion, some Poles made anti-Semitic comments when this happened, as various testimonies show, but overall, society was greatly impressed and greatly thrilled by the heroism and the bravery that these Polish Jews had shown. Of the survivors of the Ghetto Uprising, about 70 made it out to the other side of Warsaw through the sewers and joined the rest of the Polish resistance. In 1944, the city of Warsaw rose up. The Polish Home Army, which is the largest resistance group, but also the leftist, communist-leaning People's Army and the right-wing National Armed Forces, in collaboration with them, decided to liberate Warsaw by themselves. There's been tons of polemics on this. Lots of people in Poland are divided whether this was a necessary act or not. I think that these people were just brave and wanted to die with dignity. Also, I think they were misled by the Soviets. The Red Army had gone to Praga, which is on the other side of the Vistula River in Warsaw, and it egged on the Poles to fight in 1944. Well, they didn't do anything. It was just a provocation. It was just one of Stalin's many cynical tricks. The Warsaw Uprising lasted 63 days. It's really quite a miracle if we consider that initially no one thought it would last more than just a few days. But it was tragic. The uprising got no aid from the West apart from some Allied airplanes dropping leaflets on Warsaw. As a result, 200,000 people died. In the district of Wola, 40,000 people were killed in just the span of 1 week. Kurt Vonnegut wrote a good book called Slaughterhouse 5. In it, he writes that the destruction of Dresden was the greatest tragedy in European history. I like Vonnegut. I think he was a good writer, but I disagree with him. I think that the destruction of Warsaw was even worse. And as we saw, Poland was one of the allies from the beginning, unlike Germany. As a result, the whole city of Warsaw was razed to the ground. And this is what Warsaw looked like in 1944. Actually in 1950, but this is what it looked like after the war. It was just a big pile of rubble. The whole city was completely destroyed. Worse than Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden. Only about a third of the inhabitants of the city survived, including just about 11,500 of 360,000 Jews. The majority of the people who survived fled Warsaw. Szpilman, however, was one of several hundred so-called Robinson Crusoes. That was the term used for them. They were hiding in the rubble, just like Robinson Crusoe. We've all read, was it by Dumas, the book, right? Stevenson, Robert Louis Stevenson, right? So these people were like Robinson Crusoe. They were living in total savage anarchy in a city completely destroyed. Szpilman was one of them. And up to this point, he had received food and aid from his Polish friends. But now he didn't have that. He was completely cut off from them. He had no contact with his Polish friends. He was starving. He was cold. But miraculously, something nobody would have expected happened. And he was helped by Wilhelm Hosenfeld, who was a German officer. Once I wrote an article about him. One of the comments, a person wrote that they thought when they saw the movie The Pianist, they thought that Hosenfeld was a fictional person. He was a real person. He was a German. He was initially very enthusiastic about the Nazi Party, but he was also a devout Catholic. And initially he saw how in the 1930s the Nazi Party was persecuting Germany's Catholic Church, how the Nazis began to euthanize people with disabilities, elderly people. And so this sort of caused Hosenfeld to revolt against this. When he was in Warsaw during the war and in other parts of Poland, he actually saved many Poles and Jews from death. Szpilman was just one of at least several whom he helped. Interestingly enough, today the Szpilman and Hosenfeld families remain in contact. They're still friends. And in fact, at one of the universities in Germany, they give out an award, I think every 2 years, but I'm not 100% sure, for someone who helps build Polish-German dialogue. After the war, Szpilman and other people helped by Hosenfeld had tried to track down him and save him because he was in a Soviet POW camp. Well, unfortunately, they did not succeed in saving him, and so he was killed by the Soviets as a German, even though he behaved very humanely and helped a lot of people. Israel gives out this award called the Righteous Among the Nation, which is given to people who aided Jews during the Holocaust for altruistic reasons, like not for money, for example. The Bogutskis, who helped Szpilman's Polish friends who helped him, are honored by this award, but so is Hosenfeld, who received it not that long ago, in maybe 2008 or 2009, thanks to the efforts of Szpilman's surviving family. So now that we've gone through what we're most familiar with, I'd like to talk about Szpilman's career in post-war Poland. A lot of people around the world have seen The Pianist and read the book. The book's been translated into more than 30 languages. The Los Angeles Times named it the best book of the year, as did many other magazines, and rightly so. But Szpilman's musical legacy isn't very well known outside Poland, unfortunately. So after the war, the communist regime was established in Poland, the Stalinist regime that was a puppet of Moscow, of Stalin. A lot of Polish Jews left Poland at this time, but Szpilman stayed. He became the director of the popular music section at Polish radio in 1945, 1963. That's right. He was previously a classical musician. He played Chopin, Haydn, many other classical composers, but in post-war Poland, he wrote a lot of pop songs. In 1947, he composed the music to the Polish Film Chronicle. What's that? Well, today we have CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, depending on what your political preferences are. In Poland in the 1940s, there was no such thing. If you want to know what was going on in the world, you'd go to the movies. And the movies all day, they'd show this film chronicle, which was basically newsreels, just showing what was going on in Poland and the world. And Szpilman composed the music to this. He formed a Warsaw Quintet, which was 4-string musicians and himself playing the piano. And they gave over 2,000 concerts around the world, in the United States also. One of the most interesting concerts they gave was in Buenos Aires in Argentina. When Szpilman was going to Argentina to give a concert, he had remembered that some cousins of his had immigrated to Argentina in the 1930s. And Buenos Aires is a huge city. I think they have like 10 million people. Maybe not as many, but it's a big city. And he remembered that the husband of his relative was an electrical engineer, and he just looked in the phone book in like the yellow pages, the business listings, and magically got a hold of his distant relatives in Argentina, and they actually gave him pictures of his parents, which of course he didn't have because he didn't exactly keep them with him during the war. He composed over 500 songs, like Polish artists like Ewa Bem, Violeta Villas, Irena Santor. Many of these Polish artists sang songs by Szpilman, composed by him. He also, songs that he didn't like, he composed under the pen name of Allegro. He also had the pseudonym Karwiński, in which he played jazz on the radio, called Kwadrans Jazzowy. He was arguably one of the most important figures in post-war Polish culture. He also started the popular song contest in Sopot, which millions of people around Poland watch on television every summer. In 1968, Poland's communist government started an anti-Semitic campaign led by Władysław Gomułka, who was Poland's communist leader. Interestingly enough, his wife was Jewish, but his wife approved actually of this campaign. Some people say that the biggest anti-Semites are Jews. There are rumors that Torquemada, the great inquisitor, was of Jewish background. But anyway, so Gomułka expelled 20,000 Jews out of Poland, accusing them of being a Zionist fifth column. It was a very shameful episode in the communist regime's history. Szpilman was not affected by this. In an interview with him I watched, it's available on YouTube, but it's in Polish, it's not with subtitles, unfortunately. He said that he was abroad at the time and they simply didn't renew his passport. That was all that had happened to him. Nothing major had happened to him. And so this is my copy of Szpilman's memoir, the first edition, called Śmierć Miasta, The Death of a City in English. I actually told Szpilman's son that I like this title more than The Pianist because to me it's a perfect metaphor for what happened to Warsaw during the war. It was published in 1946 with the help of a Polish writer named Jerzy Waldorf, who helped him make it more literary. The book was censored by the communists. For example, Hosenfeld, the noble German officer who helped Szpilman at the end of the war, he was his nationality was turned into that of an Austrian, which is interesting because Hitler was from where, right? The funny thing about this is this resulted from the fact that basically until 1970, relations between Poland and Germany were not normalized because of certain border issues and certain territorial issues. Poland and Germany did not recognize each other until the chancellor was Willy Brandt in 1970. He did a lot of good to repair relations between Poland and Germany. And so changing Hosenfeld's nationality was part of this. Also positive references to Poland's anti-communist, but also anti-Nazi resistance were muted in the book. It was turned into a historically inaccurate film called The Unvanquished City in 1950. I actually haven't seen this film, but I've read about it. The film is about it's very historically inaccurate. It shows, for example, the Soviet Red Army liberating Warsaw from the Polish Home Army, who was destroying it, which is balderdash. The poet and essayist Czesław Miłosz, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature, was initially recruited as a screenwriter for this film, but he resigned in protest because of all the blatant lies in this film. So it was initially just published in Poland. It was only in the late 1990s that it was published in different languages, first in Germany. Szpilman's son, Andrzej, who later lived in Germany and then Switzerland, kept asking his father to reprint this memoir, of course with the historically inaccurate communist censorship changed. Szpilman initially wasn't interested. He thought nobody would read this book. Well, how wrong he was, because it was translated into more than 30 languages. Many magazines around the world praised it as the book of the year. The book quickly attracted the attention of Roman Polanski, famous filmmaker from Poland, who's been living abroad for a long time. For a long time he had wanted to make a film about Poland, either during the Nazi occupation or the communist regime. But it was not until he got this book, The Pianist, that he really decided that he wanted to make a film. Polanski was initially offered to make Schindler's List, but he rejected because of personal reasons. Schindler's List is about the Krakow ghetto. Polanski's father was Jewish, and his mother was partly Jewish, raised Catholic, but still partly Jewish. As though his parents were considered Jews by the Nazi ideology, and they were in the Krakow ghetto. Polanski's mother was killed in Mauthausen, so he didn't want to make a film about something that was so close to him. Now I'd like to play a couple songs by Szpilman. The first one is from the film in 1937, Wrzos. It's called Nie ma szczęścia bez miłości, or You Can't Be Happy Without Love. It was the lyrics are by Harold Hendryk, and this is performed by Mieczysław Fogg, F-O-G-G, who was a Polish musician who wrote many tangos. And so this is like a tango. I translated the lyrics into English for all of you. Please give that. I'm sorry?
Do you want me to hand them out for you?
Oh, please, that would be wonderful. Exit show. Everyone get a cup. Okay.
szczęścia bez miłości i bez kogoś drogiego. Twoje serce dlatego tęsknotą drży. A gdy przyjdzie wytęskniona, droższa ponad miliony, śmieje się aż do łez i raduje się, że już tu jest. Jedna chwila, jedno słowo i na serce jakby urok fal, jakbyś inne miał oczy i na nowo mój żal świat. Nie ma szczęścia bez miłości i bez kogoś drogiego. Musisz kochać choć raz, gdy chcesz poznać szczęścia moc i blask. Szczęścia bez miłości i bez kogoś drogiego. Musisz kochać choć raz, gdy chcesz poznać szczęścia moc i blask.
And one more. This song I chose in part because the destruction of Warsaw is something that I talked a lot about in today's presentation. And Warsaw was rebuilt miraculously, like a phoenix rising from the ashes after the war. The old town is probably the part that's most similar to how it looked. The old town was rebuilt based on the old blueprints of the 17th century Italian architect Canaletto. So the old town has been miraculously restored, and this is a process that lasted until the 1980s. For example, the royal castle, where the Polish kings resided after the capital was transferred from Krakow of the 16th century, was rebuilt in the 1980s, not that long ago. And so this is a song about the old town of Warsaw. I also think it's a lovely song. This is by Barbara Pliszka. I wanted to get a more famous version, but this is all that was on iTunes.
Zamieszkać wysoko i zapraszać go lęknie za wloku, z ukochaną wychylić się wzrokiem na starówkę, gdzie radość i spokój. A jeżeli nie mieszkać, to iść i zobaczyć, jak pięknie tu dziś. Wszystko tu znam od dziecka i ukochałam wszystko. Na Piwnej, na Zapiecku, na Starym Rynku też. Gdy w złoceniach zabłysną domy stare i słynne, chcę zamieszkać to blisko, blisko dachów i wież. Ach, zamieszkać wysoko i zapraszać gołębie z obłoków, z ukochaną wychylić się wzrokiem na starówkę, gdzie radość i spokój.
A jeżeli nie mieszkać, to
I zobaczyć, jak pięknie tu dziś. Zamieszkać wysoko i zapraszać gołębie z obłoków, z ukochaną wychylić się z okien na starówkę, gdzie radość i spokój.
a jeżeli nie mieszkać, to iść.
I zobaczyć, jak pięknie tu dziś.
Okay, so just one final part. We're almost finished. I just wanted to briefly talk about my encounters with the Szpilman family in Poland. So I'd first seen The Pianist when I was in the theaters, actually in Minnesota, and when I was 15 years old. I was 17 when I read the book. It was the first kind of, I come from a Polish family, but I was raised in the United States. My parents taught me how to read in Polish, but The Pianist was the first kind of real adult book I'd read in Polish. And of course, both the film and the book had a profound effect on me. They showed me that there is a lot we can be grateful for and things we take for granted, such as that we're living in times of peace and that our families are still alive, really are true blessings that even today a lot of people don't have. About 2 years ago, I started to, I watched The Pianist for the first time since I saw it in the theaters, and once again it moved me. I Googled Szpilman's last name, and I found some interviews with his widow and realized that she was still alive. She was much younger than he. She's in her 80s now. And so I really wanted to track her down and talk to her and have an interview with her. I finally did get in touch with her by contacting one of the organizers of Szpilman's, the Szpilman Song Festival in Sosnowiec, which is, as we learned, where he's from. Each 2 years, I think, there's a festival devoted to his music in Sosnowiec. And so I contacted the organizers, and they put me in touch with Szpilman's widow. And so this is my picture with her. This is, in the background, is the piano where he composed so much great music. In the background is Chopin's Death Mask. So his widow is named Halina. She's a retired rheumatologist. The doctor, her father, Józef Grzecznarowski, was a pre-war mayor of the city of Radom and an activist of the Polish Socialist Party. He was active in the fight for Poland's struggle for independence. During the war, he was prisoner of several concentration camps. After the war, he opposed the Polish Socialist Party's merging with the communists, and so was harassed by the communists then. So she herself comes from a very interesting family. There's a street named after Szpilman's father-in-law in Radom. The Szpilmans have two sons. One is, Halina Szpilman is still living in Warsaw. Her two sons live abroad. One is named Krzysztof, or Christopher in English. He got a PhD in Japanese history at Yale, lives in Japan now, and is actually a big expert on Japanese history. Our other son, Andrzej, lives in Switzerland at the moment. He's a dentist, also a musician. In the early 1980s, there was a Polish rock band called Oddział Zamknięty. I don't know if my parents know Oddział Zamknięty, do you? Well, Szpilman's son was helped them record their first album and actually wrote some of their songs. But he's a dentist, and he has two children, Alina and Daniel. Alina is actually in her senior year of high school this year and would like to apply to go to film school in Poland, so hopefully that'll happen. So Mrs. Szpilman has her granddaughter closer to her. And her grandson Daniel studied law. I'm not sure if he's still in school, and he's a journalist for various Swiss newspapers. Both grandchildren speak Polish and visit Poland sometimes. So again, this is Szpilman's piano up close. Some interesting things. This is a vase that was a wedding gift from the Bogutskis to the Szpilmans. As we saw earlier, the Bogutskis were artist friends of Szpilman who helped hide their friend when he escaped from the ghetto. And they were witnesses at the Szpilman's wedding in 1950, and they gave them this vase as a gift when I had given Mrs. Szpilman flowers, as is customary in Poland. She put them in the vase. Here, even closer, is that's actually a signed picture of Artur Rubinstein, who's a great Polish pianist of Jewish ancestry. An inspirational story. In 1945, he was invited to play at the opening of the inauguration of the United Nations Charter in San Francisco, and he was offended by the fact there was no Polish flag, so he started playing Poland's national anthem. Rubinstein was later lived in the United States, and so he was also an accomplished pianist. That's a picture of Daniel Szpilman's granddaughter. That's a picture of Mrs. Szpilman as a child, dressed up wearing a kimono, which is of course interesting because her son later would become an expert on Japanese history. And here's a picture I took at the Pawłowski Military Cemetery. It's in Warsaw. It's a military cemetery, but a lot of prominent Poles are buried there. A lot of illustrious politicians, musicians, writers, and among them is Władysław Szpilman, who's buried here. I think this is next to Wawel Castle. This is probably the most prestigious place to be buried in Poland. So that's it. As far as my presentation goes, here's my email and my website if you'd be interested. And does anyone have questions they'd like to ask me? Yes?
You had said earlier are you currently living in Poland? Or
Currently I live in the United States.
so you had lived in Poland?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Were you working there, going to school there?
Yes, well, I was teaching English, doing translations, various different things, mostly freelance work, writing, journalism.
The son that became a musician, what was his instrument?
I'm actually not sure, so I don't want to answer that question without, he's primarily a dentist, but he...
So I don't understand why his band was called Oddział Zamknięty.
He wasn't in the band.
Oh, he was not?
He was not in the band. He helped them record their first album and wrote a few songs, but he wasn't a member of the band.
Because the name Oddział Zamknięty means in English psychiatric ward, so I don't know why. This is in the time those guys were choosing very strange names for bands. So I don't psychiatric ward. They have all those strange names in the 80s, yes.
They were kind of a rebellious rock band.
Rebellious.
Kind of like maybe Guns N' Roses here, maybe at about the same time.
Ridiculous.
It sounds right for rock and roll,
Well, it's really kind of remarkable, I think, the two songs you played, how similar they sound to, you know, that era of music in the United States.
Because this is the same, you know, this is one song is from the 30s and then before the war, and the other is from the 40s after the war. So a lot of people from his era who were worried that Nazis would come to power and fled Poland and Germany, they came actually to the United States. So most of those composers, they made a big career or maybe not a big career in Hollywood. So they all have, you know, coming from the evening burn, they all have the same background.
You could just see these in one of the old movies, you know, with the dancing.
It's kind of interesting thing is a lot of the people wrote the music and they never get any royalty because there's some company, someplace in the world who playing the name to the music and they're getting royalty from many, specifically from the time tango. So it's just kind of interesting. A lot of the people never get appreciation from that. And his career, 500 songs. So in Poland, he's like from 30s until 70s. It's just unbelievable what this man achieved.
Yes?
I would like to congratulate you.
Oh, thank you.
45 minutes. Of 1,000.
It was a little more than 45 minutes.
I know it was emphasis on the Jewish people, but still, you picked up the most important.
Okay, thank you. You're kind.
Want to go home crying? Yeah.
Really?
Well, it is so tragic.
Well, he still survived the war. His family
Well,
didn't,
just
but
the history of Poland. I think I did not know.
No idea.
I
You know,
feel-
one of the things my son didn't mention is that you were outnumbered during the World War II.
yeah, he said that.
Well, I know, but you talk about the military equipment. So Poland was about 30 million people, Germany was about 70, and Russians, nobody knows, but about maybe 200. So obviously we were severely in disadvantage to fight the war.
I think there's also reasons for hope, such as the fact that I find it very inspiring that Szpilman went through hell on earth, and yet he still was able to lead a normal life. He got married, had a family, was a successful musician. I can't really...
What's the age difference between his wife and him?
16 years.
And he had such a kind face. You know, I've watched other videos of him playing, and he had such a kind face and I don't know, so much apparent joy in his life after the war that it's kind of amazing having gone through all of that.
Well, the amazing thing is that he didn't talk about the war. I asked his widow if it was because he was so traumatized, he didn't want to come back to it, but she's told me that it was more because he simply started a new life. For example, I think he wrote this in the foreword to the book. Szpilman's son, Andrzej, actually said that he had no idea about his father's wartime history until he was 12 years old and stumbled across a copy of The Death of a City. He didn't even know his father was Jewish because his mother wasn't, and he was raised Catholic. In fact, a famous Polish priest and poet, Jan Twardowski, taught religion to Szpilman's sons. So he just didn't talk about it, and to me that's amazing because there's so many war veterans. I mean, even in the United States, people who were in Vietnam, for example, who suffer from PTSD and so many years after can't get a grip on it, but somehow they did. Similarly, when I was in high school a decade ago, there were a couple of lost boys from Sudan whom I went to high school with, and I was just astounded by the fact that they went through hell. They survived genocide, and yet they came to the United States, South Dakota. They finished university. They finished college. They became successful. They got married. The local Midwestern girls, and to me that's inspiring. To me, it's inspiring that someone who can go through such horrible things can actually lead a life of normalcy. Same thing with Warsaw. The city was completely devastated, brick by brick, but it was rebuilt. Now, it'll never be the same as it was, but I still think it's a vibrant city.
It was interesting when we were doing the community read, we looked at some pictures of Warsaw as it was being rebuilt and how some of it was rebuilt exactly as it had been, down to paint colors and things like that, which was interesting.
I will tell you two interesting stories. So one is, there was, of course, a lot of people who worked for Szpilman when he was the director of the Polish radio. He was one of the toughest. There are still people who have big careers and they talk about him as one of the toughest. If somebody wanted to do something, perform, it had to be perfect or not accepted. So he was one of the toughest, and he, helped people build their career by making them perfect. I mean, there was nothing weak, and so people still talk about him and in the fear. As a boss, you have to do perfect, otherwise you're in trouble.
You do realize that his widow and son might be watching this later, right?
Well, they say that he was a tough boss. It's not like somebody comes bring us songs and they will run on the radio. He said, it's not good, come back tomorrow and make it better. I think just like with every profession.
I think we're lacking some of that these days, that not a high enough level of expectation in a lot of things. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's what I think. So.
That's what Mr. Miyagi was all about, right?
That's right.
You're probably too young to know who Mr. Miyagi is, right? No?
Wax on, wax off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When you,
Now that I remember.
Yep.
when you showed the pictures of Warsaw, and it was just empty, but way in the background, there were some buildings, and way to the right, there were some buildings.
These are just the ruins of those skyscrapers.
Well, the district.
How he survived in those,
Yeah, in those buildings, yeah.
way in the background. Okay.
Do you think the movie portrayed it probably as it was? In particular, I was curious, do you think there was truly a piano?
Yes, there was. There was. That actually did happen. That story was confirmed, and Szpilman later talked about it, and the details. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. The movie's pretty. I read the book a long time ago, almost about 10 years ago actually, but I saw the movie more recently. But the book's based on what I remember from the book and from my conversations with the Szpilman family. I've mostly talked to Halina Szpilman. I've talked to Szpilman's son Andrzej on the phone once and on the internet through Facebook a few times. But I've also the movie's very close to what had actually happened. There were just a couple very minor artistic licenses. First was the character of Dorota. At the beginning of the film, he's shown being kind of flirting with this attractive blonde lady who later gets married and helps him hide. She was a completely fictional character. I even asked Mrs. Szpilman about this. She said that her husband had different girlfriends at that time, but she was a completely fictional character. The other artistic license is the pickle scene. I don't remember if there's a scene in which Szpilman's hiding and starving in a house. And later the good-hearted German officer Hosenfeld finds him and helps him. Well, he finds a jar of pickles, and he has trouble opening it. Well, actually, this never happened. This is actually something from Polanski's life. When Warsaw, he was in Krakow before the war as a child, and during the Nazi invasion of Poland, he and his parents and his sister Annette had fled to Warsaw, thinking it would be safer. Well, it wasn't, and during the air bombings of Warsaw, they were in a cellar starving, and they had come across a can of pickles, and that's initially they were very happy that they could eat something, but eventually they became tired of eating pickles, and pickles are also salty, and so they dehydrate you. So the pickle scene was based from Polanski's experiences, but other than that, the film is pretty accurate. I think that the screenwriter Ronald Harwood, I think his name is, did a pretty good job of showing what had happened.
You know, just like sometimes they show in old movies when there was some invasion, they throw the piano through the window. Almost every house, every other house had piano in Poland, like here in Midwest, every house had foot pump organ. It was the same kind of frequency of the instrument. That's why they had piano, because they had big apartments.
This was a
Yes?
wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
A bit beside the main point, but I've always wondered with other Eastern European countries, how did Warsaw get rebuilt? Were the Russians rebuilding it during
And who paid for it?
The people, you know,
People there.
this was the communism,
Okay.
so there was a direct order from Warsaw. You have to give us 10,000 red bricks in 1 week, otherwise you lose your post. So they were bringing the bricks from other cities to the degree that there is kind of actually one tragedy. There was a city in Lower Silesia that was probably one of the oldest, the best kept old city from 14th century. There were hundreds of buildings, and they thought, okay, we will put this apart and send the bricks to build Warsaw. But most of the time there was so much houses destroyed for many years that there was plenty of brick that they were able to build Warsaw.
It's interesting that the skills were around or recreated, I mean, or that this culture would be rebuilding cathedrals and churches too.
Well, I should qualify. The old town was rebuilt perfectly from the 17th century Italian architect Canaletto's blueprint. The old town is really a miracle in historical preservation. 1979, UNESCO added it to its World Heritage Site. But a lot of Warsaw wasn't exactly rebuilt that way. A lot of it was simply gray, drab, communist era, buildings. There's something like, for example, there's the beautiful Baroque palace in Wilanów, which was built by King John Sobieski, which was modeled after Versailles in France. That didn't suffer too much damage in the war. But, and so there's Warsaw's an interesting city. A lot of it is communist era, gray buildings that I think Americans who might go there might be quite surprised. But then there's these islands like the old town that are, that were miraculously rebuilt.
So that even the Soviet respected that, or did not.
Well,
Or
they
did
wanted to
rebuild?
rebuild, you know.
Okay, so for propaganda reasons.
They also built an extremely ugly building, in my opinion at least, called the Communist of Culture and Science. It was Stalin's gift for gifts, in quotes, for Poland. At the moment when it was built, it was the tallest building in Warsaw, in all of Europe except for Moscow. And some people like it. I think it's very ugly. There's a joke in Warsaw under communism that the prettiest view of Warsaw is from the terrace of the Palace of Culture and Science, because it's the only one where you can see the palace. So there's a lot of stuff like that in Warsaw, but certainly it's also a very green city. 25% of Warsaw is parks and forests. So I think it's a good city to visit. I don't know, maybe.
And a lot of big palaces, like in Paris, so that was really something very interesting. So it was a very nice city for the World War II. But a lot of the places, big squares are gone because they try to build. And of course, right now, the space is difficult, expensive. We have many American architects coming, and they have designed just almost like in New York City, certain buildings. So it's going in different directions.
There's also, we might be interested that there's actually, I think there's probably no other place in Poland I've ever been. There's so many places named after American presidents. There's a statue of Ronald Reagan across from the American embassy. There's squares named after Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover.
You find them in odd places.
Right, but there's a lot in Warsaw. There's a statue of George Washington. So
Why? I think they got Bush and Bill
this.
Well, I think Poland's probably one of the most pro-American countries in Europe. Like I said earlier, Wilson, for example, and Reagan also did a lot to fight for Polish independence.
Did the Poles in the United States send money then back to Poland to help build it again or not?
No, it's just really independent. You know, it's doing well country, so it's those times kind of over. You know, maybe after the war.
Not now, but right after the war.
Well, it was difficult because the communist government did not allow.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to. Thank you.
Do you have cards? Because if